Joining us right now live from Montreal from TSN 690, my friend, your friend out there in La Belle Provence, Joey Alfieri. Joey, welcome again, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, Anthony.
Pleasure's all mine. Joey, we had on Kyle Becker to start the show. It seems like him and the teammates are all set and ready for this 4-1 derby. I'm sure all the Montreal fans are excited and ready for another battle with TFC. This one shapes up to be a real good game. Both teams right now are hitting their gear early on. Montreal has been lights out with Piatti, Drogba picking it up. But what I like about this Montreal team, Joey, is their defense right now has been a brick wall, and many teams have had trouble penetrating through it. Talk about that back end.
Yeah, you know what, Anthony? It's been tremendous. As good as Laurent Simon was last year, obviously winning Defender of the Year. I mean, he's been, I would say, even better because he's added that element of discipline. Last year there was times where he got a little hot, picked up some silly cards, silly fouls here and there, but through the first stretch of the season here, it's been all good, and obviously he's had a nice partnership with Victor Cabrera, who picked up a knock, unfortunately, in the last game, but those two center backs have played very, very well, and then on the at the fullback positions, Asum Kamara, since he's been back from injury, has been very, very good on the right side. Ambrose Oyongo was okay before he got injured in the game at home against the Red Bulls a few weeks ago, but he's obviously the fullback who gets forward the most. He brings that dynamic ability to go forward. So once he's healthy and fit to go, that's going to add another dynamic. And Donny Toya at the back, he is what he is, a good MLS player, a guy who plays solid minutes, a good one-on-one defender. Doesn't get forward too much, but you know that he's not going to be a liability defensively. So as a whole, that back line, you hit the nail on the head. It's been tremendous.
Joey, we spoke to Kyle, and one thing that I mentioned to Kyle about him personally, about his play and his whole team this year from the start of the season, is they've been playing with a chip on their shoulder. They've been playing with there's a mission at hand. It's to get to the final and to win it all and bring a championship to Montreal. I sense that. I feel it. And I feel that last year, the way they started out of the gate real poorly, especially with that great Champions League run, that they won't repeat it as we've seen sitting at the top of the table early on this year. I don't know if you see it since you see them day in and day out, but I noticed a chip on their shoulder, a real positive arrogance.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's well said. I think there is a positive arrogance, and you know what? I started to feel that a little bit when Didier Drogba joined the team and started lighting it up the way he did last season. Didier Drogba is kind of the pulse of the team. You see it. You saw it when he came on against Chicago. He jumps on and he barks orders, and he just has this confidence to him. And, I don't want to say it's arrogance, because I don't think it's arrogance, but, he knows he's good, and the team kind of follows. And I think that's one of the things that people don't get to see. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily always come across on TV, but I think if you're there and you're around the team, you see that, he's the guy who kind of sets the tone for the team. And dominance on the field carries over to in the locker room, and guys follow him as they go. And I think that's kind of where it came from. I think, anytime you have a guy like Drogba, that type of personality, I think it's infectious. And that's definitely where it comes from. I think that's really one of the reasons why they had success last year. It's been a change in attitude, and when you have a guy, you have that luxury of having a guy who's kind of seen it all: World Cup, Champions League finals. It's really a luxury, not just on the field but in the room as well, and that's where I think that confidence comes from.
Joey, last year at this time, I remember a lot of people calling for the head of Frank Lopez early on. About 10 games in, maybe 12 games in, people had had enough of Frank Lopez. I haven't heard a peep, a word negative at all towards the youngster, the young guy, the guy that Montreal has had in their stable for many years, Biello. Let's talk about what you've seen that you've liked of him early on, and let's talk about him learning on the job last year and transferring all that this year on his own.
Yeah, well, obviously I think it helps, of course, that he's a guy born and raised in Montreal. He speaks French, English, Italian, obviously, which helps in the community. So he's going to be well liked right off the bat. But just going beyond that, I think he's a guy who, doesn't necessarily come across arrogant. One of the younger coaches in MLS, and he doesn't come across as arrogant. He's a smart man, and just his ability to change tactics in the game and just to adapt. And you know what? Maybe not adapt to the opposition, but the Impact don't necessarily worry. That's the biggest difference to me. Is you ask them leading up to a game, what does Chicago do well, or what does Columbus do well, and they'll tell you what they do well. But Montreal's not concerned about the other teams, and I think that's the biggest difference under Frank. I think under Frank, I think Frank gets a tough rap. I think overall, I think the body of work, wasn't great during the regular season. But you look at the roster that he had his first year, the year that they finished last. I mean, it's tough to do anything with that. But they did have some positive moments under Frank. But I think Mauro brings stability, relates better to the players on a human level, and you think that making substitutions, a lot of armchair coaches and stuff think it's easy to make the right substitution at the right time, but it's not always the case. And it just seems that when he has to adapt or when he has to bring somebody on, he has a really good feel of what needs to be done, what the team's missing, and the subs even this year have often come on and made immediate impacts and have won the impacts of games. So really smart head coach, and I think he's just going to get better as he gets more and more experience.
Joey, God bless Dominic Oduro. We saw him here in Toronto. He's got a great attitude, blazing speed, wonderful smile. But I tell you, I mean, the amount of chances that he's had early on and the amount of miss hits has been unbelievable. I'm afraid it could come down to haunt them down the stretch here if he continues to miss, sitters right there. I mean, they're going to have to look at this once the market opens up in the summer and say, where can we help ourselves out? Or maybe see if there's a trade available to upgrade there, because I think if they want to go deep in the playoffs, Dominic Oduro is not going to be a guy that they can rely on.
Well, you know what? Yes and no, Anthony. I think anytime you have a chance to upgrade, especially at attacking positions, I think you need to do so, obviously. But at this point, I mean, I think you and I and the people who follow MLS have seen Dominic Oduro enough to know what he is. And you know what? At times, in the Chicago game last weekend is a perfect example of that. At times, he makes the perfect runs and perfect passes sent into him, and he'll look absolutely foolish, either misplaying the ball or not taking the right path to the ball. And then there's other times where you look and, he sets up both goals, essentially picked up assists on both of Montreal's goals in the second half. And there's times he looks really, really good. So I like him better on the wing. I'll be honest with you. I like him better playing on the right side. I think once Drogba's up top, I think it opens things up for a lot of people. And I think it helps Dom like it does everybody else. But, to say that that's the number one priority is to upgrade on Dominic Oduro, I don't think so. I think they can get by with Dominic Oduro. As he proved last year, there are times where, he misses, like you said, sitters, but there's also other times where he comes through. It just depends what you're kind of expecting from him. But I think when he uses his speed effectively, I think he definitely helps Montreal.
Joey, just before we let you go, we really appreciate your time. Let's talk about these two cities, Montreal and Toronto. Ever since they've entered MLS, they've been lights out, two solid franchises. Montreal, more success than TFC, obviously in playoffs and in Champions League. TFC making a lot of noise with their signings of Jovinko, Bradley, on and on. Montreal with Drogba and Piatti, who has been unbelievable. I think this is something that the MLS head offices should say, wow, look at these two Canadian markets. And even Vancouver last year did some good things as well. And say to themselves, to all the new expansion teams that are coming in, look at Montreal, look at Toronto, and even to another effect down south, look at what Orlando has done. I think this is great because the two cities that we both live in are smart, soccer savvy cities. They're not stupid. They understand the product on the field. They understand the world game, and they come out to support these two cities. Talk about the importance and the success of both of them, Joey.
I agree, and you know what? I think Montreal and Toronto kind of took similar paths. Obviously Montreal hasn't spent nearly as much money as Toronto has, but Montreal hasn't been shy to spend the smart money. Toronto hasn't always invested or hasn't always made the right choices when it comes to player personnel, but I think they've hit it out of the park the last couple of years, especially bringing over Jovinko has been huge. And, it just goes to show, though, that both teams, and I think Toronto FC, you saw it this year with the acquisitions that they made with Moore and Irwin and company and Johnson, I think both teams realized that bringing in impact players, dominant players like Jovinko and Altidore, Piatti, Drogba is one thing, but they need to be surrounded. And I don't know if both teams figured that out right away. I think they need to be surrounded with MLS, quality MLS players. And I think that's one of the things that both teams have figured out relatively quickly now. And, so it's great to spend the money, but like you said, I think it's two franchises who kind of get it, and they understand, and they've learned through mistakes, but they kind of figured it out now that, you need the star player for sure, but you also have to surround them with quality MLS talent. And I think any team coming into the league can definitely learn from the path that Toronto and Montreal specifically have gone on since joining MLS. And I think if you do that, I think that's a blueprint for success. I know people in Montreal aren't going to be happy to hear this. I know people in Toronto aren't going to be happy to hear this, but I think with the way that both teams are built, and from the management and what they've learned, I think that these are two teams that are going to be competitive for a very, very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Joey, listen, we really appreciate you taking time. Hopefully you get better. And listen, say hi to me to Grant Needham. He was on our show a number of times in the years past. You guys do a great job. Where can people listen to that new show that you talk about the impact week in and week out? Where can they listen to that? That's
right. So former men's national team player Grant Needham and I host a show every Wednesday on TSN 690, and you can listen to it online at tsn690.ca. It's every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. So we're on tomorrow night. So that'll be an interesting show for sure. Grant and I often tend to disagree when it comes to soccer, so it makes for some very intriguing radio.
Any guests that we should be tuned for to listen in tomorrow night?
Absolutely. I think Dominic Oduro is going to be dropping by.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah. And FC Montreal, the USL team's assistant coach Simon Gaddy, will get him on the phone as well.
Well, I forgot to ask you quickly, in 30 seconds or less, Joey, apparently there's a youngster in the Montreal system that's being scouted in the Premier League. Balou, forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, is that right?
No, that's it. Balou Jean-Yves Tabla, yeah, 17-year-old kid, born in the Ivory Coast, came over to Canada when he was younger. And I saw him last week. I got to see him up close because TFC2 was in town, and Anthony, I have to tell you, he was phenomenal. I think every time the ball was on his foot, I was on the edge of my seat calling that game. He's fantastic, and obviously now this morning reports have surfaced saying that teams like Man City and Chelsea are interested in buying him. The Impact have come out and said that they're not in a hurry necessarily to sell him just yet, but this is a youngster, the crown jewel of the academy, it looks like, and people in Montreal get to see him up close with FC Montreal, and I've seen one game, and he was a treat.
Well, can he play for Canada? That's all I care about.
Yeah, he played. He represented Canada at the U20s. Was it last month?
There you go. So I'm happy. Make sure that he keeps that in mind, that when he becomes a goal-scoring machine, or how great he comes back to represent our country so we can get to the World Cup, Joey.
Hopefully.
Joey Alfieri, thank you so much again for making time. Get better, my friend.
Thanks, Anthony.
One of the best out there in La Belle Provence in Montreal, Quebec, Joey Alfieri of 690 TSN. Great having him on.